Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, and then we'll move on into suffrage notes. Remember, we said progressives wanted to reform things. They wanted to solve the problems of urbanization and industrialization. And one of the things progressives wanted to solve was the dangerous workplace. They wanted a much safer workplace. There's going to be a tragedy on March 25th, 1911, that's going to show the need for reform. The Triangle Shirtwaist Company, New York City. About 500 employees worked at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, mostly Jewish or Italian immigrant women. They were just completing their 6-day work week, getting ready to leave, and a fire breaks out in a rag bin. And it is not long before the entire 8th floor of the 10-story building was burning. Escape was impossible. The stairways were kept locked. They were afraid women would steal fabric. Some try to jump down a freight elevator, but it becomes jammed by women jumping down the shaft. You do have about 60 women that jumped out the windows rather than being burned alive. And journalists would write after this how just 1 year before this, these women went on strike for safer and more sanitary conditions. All in all, 500 employees. All in all, 146 people died. Here's one of the political cartoons referring to a locked door. Here's some of the women that jumped. As you can see, even the tallest ladders that they had at the time for the fire department could not reach all the way up to rescue the people that were in those upper floors. And the fire moved very quickly through there, killing people. And you're going to start having push for worker safety after this. Rose Schneiderman, Women's Trade Union League organizer. She's going to argue that the working class need to protest to bring change. If the workers just deal with it and they don't protest, employers will never change. After this fire, there was huge outrage. You had legislation in New York swiftly passed to protect workers, which is why even today, New York has the strictest fire safety codes in the nation. And now we'll talk about something else that progressives pushed for, and that is women's suffrage. Remember, suffrage means the right to vote. Okay, it's not suffering, it's suffrage. There was a lot of opposition to this. Some feared that women would vote for prohibition. Some feared that women getting the right to vote, they would think they should deserve better wages and better working conditions. But the push had been around for a while. The first women's right convention is going to take place in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. About 300 people will attend. And over the next 4 decades or so, there's going to be a variety of meetings and conventions pushing and talking and planning for women's suffrage. The first place to grant women the unrestricted right to vote was in 1869 in the Wyoming territory. And when the 15th Amendment is going to be passed around the same time period, it's going to cause a lot of division. Because if you look at the 15th Amendment, it looks like it has very gender-neutral language. But the women who tried to test out the 15th Amendment are turned away and told, oh, that doesn't apply to them. So a lot of division there. All right. Let's talk about a couple different organizations that are going to take up this cause. The first we'll mention is the National American Women's Suffrage Association, NASA, formed about 1890. Its first two presidents were Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. After the Civil War, they earned a distrust of the Republicans, partly because of the 15th Amendment leaving them out. And they decide to go with a strategy of going state by state. They wanted to go to each state and get each state to pass laws allowing women to vote. And once all the states do this, it basically would be a national law. This is going to be met with very little success. By 1901, over a decade later, they only had 4 states that had passed it, and they were all out west, where women worked differently than they did in the east. It was hard work out west. Another organization is the National Women's Party. The National Women's Party is going to be led by Alice Paul. They're going to go about this a little different. Instead of going state by state, they're going to focus their strategy on a national strategy. They want a constitutional amendment passed. Then everybody in the nation would fall under it. And Paul's going to use some new tactics. They would picket the White House, trying to put pressure on the president, who at this time would have been Woodrow Wilson. Some of them even went so far that they chained themselves to the fences. Many of them got arrested. Some, when they went to jail, they'd go on a hunger strike and not eat until their demands were met. And the movement starts gaining some momentum. You started having some states hold these special referendums on women's suffrage, and even though they failed, women were starting to get 35, 45% of the vote. Not enough to pass, but way more than they had previously. NASA grows to 2 million members under their new leader, Carrie Chapman Catt, continuing with that state-by-state strategy. But the big thing that's really going to help women out is going to be World War I. The men were away. The women kept this country running. They supported the war effort. And so when World War I takes place and the women keep this country running, the argument of, what have women done or whatever, it became silly. And the opposition movement really got weakened by this. Even Wilson in 1918 gives a speech to Congress where he shows his support for women's suffrage. In 1918, the Senate is going to vote on an amendment for women's suffrage. It fails by 2 votes. So what the suffragists decide to do is they are going to target 4 senators that voted against it, that were up for re-election. So they pick 4 senators up for re-election that voted no. They target those 4 senators in their campaign, and 3 out of those 4 lose re-election. This sends a huge message to all politicians that the women were a powerful group, and maybe you shouldn't go against them. And so when it comes up for again, the 19th Amendment is going to be passed by Congress in 1919, ratified by the states in 1920, and women now had full voting rights.